friends, this is Rick, and this is your seat at the table. And what I want to talk about is salvage. All right, I tried to find some interesting artwork and things like that on the internet. And I wasn't overly successful in finding too many that would suit what I wanted to put down. And one of those things that how the system works, how a game system is played out. Now, I noticed that over the decades, at the very beginning, the earliest days of BattleTech and MechWarrior, this issue is much more important, and it still is to some players. It's part of that resource management crew or mindset. To understand how things started in 3025, this third succession war is finally ground to a halt, more or less because all sides are exhausted. They've used up their considerable amounts of supplies. They've beat up their forces, and they need to recover. Now, they've resulted in border skirmishes and raiding each other, etc., on a smaller scale. But for the most part, the open major conflict of the inner sphere of yet another quote world war scenario has petered out, and we're getting close to what's considered the fourth succession war, and yet another attempt at taking command and control. And that's a whole other set of videos by itself too. So what we're going to talk about is the importance of salvage. It's suggested and implied repeatedly. Let me see if I can get every machine, for the most part, in BattleTech is been around a long time and been reused. If you look at the artwork here on the Black Widows, you can see all kinds of what would be considered junk, but it's important to salvage in the game. The actual mechanics, when we look at this particular book, which would have been from the earliest years of BattleTech itself, and it can tell you that right here, Sheridan's Crusader was heavily damaged in the Battle of Cordon 4. As a result, the mech's fusion power plant functions inefficiently and produces an extra 2 points of heat every turn. MechWarrior John Hayes' Griffin jump jet suffered heavy impact damage from assault landing Andromeda 6. The mech now can jump a maximum of 3 hexes. Each hex jumped adds 2 points of heat. The Griffin's PPC fire control also functions erratically. It misfires and adds heat to any roll of a 10 plus. This roll should be made before the 2-hit roll. So pretty much every mech in the Black Widows company has a mechanical flaw or defect or issues, and in part because that technology is difficult to replace. Across the inner sphere, there are scores of factories that still produce battle mechs in limited numbers. The total, it's never been counted out or put into succinct words that I know of, although the SarnaNet might have more information on this particular subject. The general battle mech production lines probably only produces maybe 500 new mechs a year. And when you look at the sheer size of the inner sphere forces, the houses, the mercenaries, the independents, the periphery, etc., Comstar, all that together, 500 is a drop in the bucket. And so when you have major conflicts where you can see entire regiments destroyed or decimated, where machines are completely wrecked, you can't just call up your quartermaster corps and requisition an entire wave of brand new machines to replace the lost machines, because that's just not an option, in part because the total warfare concept of the first couple succession wars saw a massive one of the first things you do is you go after your enemy's ability to conduct war, which includes the industrial base that produces the machinery, the munitions, and so on and so forth. And in the process, you also go nuke happy in the first succession war, and we see this slow slide begin where knowledge is beginning to become lost. And it's much more common 300 odd years later when we start playing in BattleTech universe. So there's many people who are technicians and mechanics and things like this who understand how to repair stuff but they don't understand necessarily how the stuff they're repairing was manufactured in the first place. And the stuff that's being manufactured new is often being manufactured in semi-automated or fully automated facilities that are leftovers from the Starlink era, when they did understand how these things were constructed and built and how to improve on them. This is one of the things that sets the clans out when the clans arrive later, is that the fact is they never lost that ability. They retained it, and then they can improve upon it, which allowed them to slowly improve on the designs, hence the Omnimex and the clan, the elementals, combat armor, battle armor, etc., etc. The inner sphere. So this is why the Gray Death's Legion's capture of the Helm memory core was such a vital thing. It's also a reason why Hans Devon's creation of the new Avalon Institute of Science, or NASA, was also such an important thing, and is that they're trying to. They understand that they're on a precipice, and that it won't. Another 100 years, the ability to produce anything of high tech is going to become very problematic. And once you hit a tipping point, it's almost impossible to reverse without a major renaissance, which is what they're trying to do before the fourth succession work. Between the third and the fourth is this beginning of this nascent renaissance of technology and science and development in the inner sphere, and to replace their their damaged equipment. Once again, this is the topic that's great for another video altogether. So salvage becomes extremely crucial, and it's said in the Great Death and many others. One of their common teaching tools to their new mech warriors is, whenever possible, salvage something. So if you're in a battle and you win the battle, or you win the engagement, and the enemy leaves an arm, their arm of their mech laying on the ground, you don't turn your nose up and walk away. You pick up that arm and you lug it back to your camp, because that arm is going to consist of lots of parts, and those parts are extremely valuable because it's very hard to get replacement parts for your own machines. This also suggests that attrition takes a role too. So if you're into that resource management thing, and there's a lot of players who don't, because it's a chunky part of rules for BattleTech. But there's a lot of us who really do enjoy that stuff. It's because that sort of stuff can be done off the table. You can take that homework home between your table games and work on that stuff on the side and say, okay, well, my technicians and myself, my Aztecs and stuff were able to salvage, this, that, and the other thing from that arm we took off of a Battle Master. And if you look at the blueprint I've got sitting here, you can just see all the different components and material options. And a lot of these things are transferable. The weapon systems that come out for one machine potentially can fit into another machine. Whether the original machine actually mounted that or not, we get into there's some set of rules for kit bashing stuff, but for the most part, what you're trying to do is salvage material that's going to be reusable in other similar mechs. So we capture the arm of a battle master, perhaps our command or the larger entity that we service or serve has another battle master somewhere in its ranks, and can make use of those components that are designed for that battle master. So they will find themselves back into the machine. There's also this nostalgia concept that sometimes machines, the battle mechs that MechWarrior individual pilots pilot, potentially are hundreds of years old. Some of them date back to the original manufacturer of that machine was in the Starlink era or shortly after. And so you've maintained this thing for those years, and you have to get parts, and you have to get them from someplace. And there's just not enough factories left to produce everything you need to replace all the stuff you do. It's hard enough for the houses to maintain enough munitions and the basic supplies. And then there's the movement problem. It takes a lot of effort, money, and time to move stuff from this planet to that planet, and so you have to try to stockpile. So this is what also limited a lot of conflicts in the later decades and centuries of BattleTech leading up to the Fourth Succession War, was that in order to sustain a large campaign on a wide front of multiple planets across an entire house against another house is just mind-boggling, and you need years of preparations in advance to stockpile stuff. And to counter that sort of thing, you got to do the same thing. So this is where the raiding comes in. This is why so many houses raid each other when they know that the other house is building up a massive stockpile somewhere. A, there's a huge stockpile to go tap into and borrow from. Thank you very much. B, by or trying to destroy said stockpile by limiting your opponent's ability to do what the whole point of those massive stockpiles are going to be is to keep fuel in their war machine so it can keep grinding you down, and C, to proactively defend yourself or prepare for your version of that. So these houses are constantly in flux. So most of the big campaigns in the Third Succession War are fought over a handful of planets. There's no major invasion. So this is what makes such the huge impact of the Fourth Succession War such a eye-turning thing. Is Hans de Man and other elements of his command staff realized the whole point of war was total war, and that if this petty little grind fest has been going on for hundreds of years just isn't cutting the mustard, and it's not going to change the status quo. So if you really want to change the status quo, you got to think big. And in part, so his union with Katrina Steiner and Hal Steiner was one of those thoughts, and he was developing this concept, this plan for decades before. And a lot of that comes out of his near death and capture during the Sword and the Dagger novel, which I did a little video on a little bit ago, where he's almost replaced by a body double by some foes, and he learned some hard lessons from that, and he started realizing if you really want to take out your enemy, you got to think big and you got to plan well ahead. So he initiates a whole anyway. I'm getting off on track because once again there's so much material for videos, it's just crazy. So when I'm looking at the concept and importance of salvage and recapturing your stuff. The fact of the matter is, let's say you operate in a company that's attached to a house de Bond, and you're part of the third or the fourth de Bond guards, and there's 36 on average 36 mechs to a battalion. There could be 36 to 50 tanks to a tank battalion, etc., etc. So your mechs, of those 36 mechs in that battalion, you're going to be one mech warrior or a commander perhaps of a lance of 4, or a company commander of a lance of 3 lances equaling 12 mechs, or a third of a battalion or a quarter. I guess it's 36 would be 48 mechs, excuse me, 48 mechs, because there's usually 4 companies to a battalion. Of those 12 mechs in your company, the chances that any one of them are new, and I mean fairly new, as in perhaps built within the last in your lifetime, in your generation, is probably 2%, maybe 2%. So maybe the newest machine assigned to your command, it was built in your grandfather's era. So they're 100 years old, and they're constantly maintained and repaired. Imagine a U.S. military, our military today, still using World War II technology, tanks and machines, because guess what? We still do. Oh, we do. Think about the 50 caliber, the Ma Deuce, the heavy machine gun. It's such a great technology that we have improved on it. We've created different versions. We've got the Gatling gun. We got all kinds of high speed replacements. But the actual 50 caliber Ma Deuce is a solid piece of technology, and it's easy to maintain and easy to replace, and it's such a durable machine. It's outlasted its creators. Our bombers in our bomber fleet, the B-52, going on 60, 70 years old. I mean, it was created in the 50s initially, the late 50s, and they expect it to be still viable for another 25 years. Because you can, the actual frame and the skin of those planes, some of those are older than most of us. Anyway, our military still flying them, still utilizes them, still keeps them maintained and upgrades them. So the concept's the same. So when we're looking at the sheer size of distance it takes to move material, men, material, and supplies, and then you have to take into account the broad, wide range of machinery available to you. In the Star League era, back before the first succession war, it was quite common to have entire companies of the same type of machine, or an entire lance of the same type of machine. You would have a lance of battle masters. Perhaps you would have a recon lance of wasps. You wouldn't have a motley collage of different types and sizes in that same unit uh, on a normal basis, because a maintenance becomes a problem, which is what we have at the beginning of the MechWarrior saga. When we start MechWarrior, our technicians have to be versed in numerous different types of machinery and types of machines, and then certain houses produce their own designs, which then have been captured or sold to and transferred to other houses, etc., etc. So we get this collage, and so having this huge well of parts that fit everything is most likely not going to happen. So this is where it's not unheard of for even line units in the house to have dodgy equipment or to have stuff that needs some serious tweaking or working on, but they just don't have the components to do that yet. Until they get their hands on it, they can't fix it. So battlefield salvage is vastly important. It also is important to deny those resources to your enemy. So if you just go to a battle and you have a fight and one of your mechs get knocked out and you leave it laying out there in the field, somebody's going to go pick it up. If not you, your enemy. If not you and your enemy, somebody coming later, because it will not stay there and just rust in the field forever. I mean, there's the possibility that is, it could happen. You could be in some remote backwater somewhere, and it might be 50 years or 100 years before it's recovered, but eventually somebody's going to recover it. And irony of ironies, 100 years later, a wreck of a battle master laying out in the mud someplace gets recovered, and there's still viable components within that wreck that can find themselves reused in other machines for another era. So it's possible that some of them, every machine out there is its own kind of a Frankenstein of stuff. Even in the more modern, updated versions of BattleTech, when we get to the later eras after the Fourth Succession War, prior to the Clan War, the quote attempt of the golden age of the resurrection of the Star League before the Dark Ages break out and the War of Blake basically craps on everything and sends everything into big problems, and the FedCom war, etc., etc. The politics destroys it, tries to just their level best to destroy everything again and to gain for themselves. There's never been a point in time prior to the end of the Star League that you have an unlimited supply of parts and materials to keep your pristine machines pristine. This is one of the things that made the ComGuard such a shock factor to the inner sphere. And even the clans to a little bit, was the fact that most of these machines have been mothballed. The ComGuard's majority of the ComGuard's equipment were former Star League military. The stuff that didn't go with Kerensky and the Exodus was stuffed away and mothballed and well taken care of. So you have a lot of actual pristine, what you call near new machines, very low mileage, that came out fighting. And then they go up against the clans and they're top the line, cutting edge, 10 generations advanced stuff above the inner spheres equipment, including their grandfather's SLD equipment, and it's decimated. I mean, the Comstar wins at Tokiad, but it's by a thin margin on several occasions and at a horrific cost to the ComGuards. Lots of salvage, and lots of not so now pristine mechs sitting out there and being recovered and resurfaced and repaired. We still do that today. We don't leave, our conflicts around the world when we have a a combat vehicle get damaged, we send a wrecker crew out to recover it. And generally speaking, unless it's a total wash, unless it's burnt to a cinder, they haul that damaged machine back to a motor pool somewhere, and the mechanics will start scavenging it for material because it's cheaper than putting new stuff in. It's perfectly good, functionable, and we can do it. We do that today. This is the whole point of the junkyard industry, where you want to call it today now, the reclamation, whatever. Uh, I can't afford new stuff. I go to the junkyard and get something that come off of somebody else's thing that failed for another reason, and their part still functions in my vehicle for many years to go. And if I can put the thing on myself, I do it. If I can't, I have to get somebody else. That's another part of the salvage and mechanics of repair. We're back to that, the bean counting part of resource management. Because if you're running a company, well, if you're an independent and you're a mercenary, how many Aztecs do you have employed? How many technicians can you afford to have? How good are they in their knowledge? And then at the end, then what can they MacGyver out of stuff? What can they manufacture from scratch to fill in the banks to get things so it will fit the way you want it to fit, and so on and so forth. And then a big part, we're back to that: finding the parts, getting the material, and keeping it and stockpiling it. So then we go from that issue of movement again. So if we move an entire command unit around, the logistics chain has to change and move with it. So you're prioritizing basic stuff. Certain things are more important than other things. Food, water, fuel, and munitions become prioritized over parts and machinery. And so they get moved first because you can't function if you can't eat, drink, and keep your machine functioning, moving. And if you don't have the weapon, the ammo loads for your weapons, then it's kind of redundant. That's why there's a couple schools of thought on expendable munition weapons versus energy weapons. Ideally, in a smart world, there would be no missiles and no autocannons and no machine guns, because it would be more better for your logistics chain to have nothing but energy-based weapons. The energy-based weapons, on the other hand, have a counterbalance. As a good game creator, if you're going to create a game, you need to understand that there needs to be give and take. There has to be an accountability for everything. Otherwise, you can't do this Monty Hall, Father Christmas mindset and not have something to counter it. Otherwise, it becomes too lopsided one side and it's no longer fun. So to counterbalance this, the energy-based weapons are much more technically advanced. It means they take more technical. They take more repair time to repair and fix. They also create excess heat, so you damage your machine or have your machine inefficiently run because it can't handle the sheer amount of energy output that firing all your energy-based weapons might do. So you have to learn how to manage the heat issues. So and they're much more susceptible to secondary damage and things like this, where a munition-based stuff can pack a much more potent punch, but it also produces far less heat, and the mechanics of a autocannon are going to be much more simpler than a particle projection cannon. And the internal components of an autocannon are going to be fewer, and they're going to be more mechanically based, which means your lower tech base would have an easier time repairing a damaged autocannon than a damaged particle projection cannon. Now, why does that matter? Well, it doesn't if they're just into the gameplay and for playing purposes. I mean, that's at the end of the day. But if you're into the whole ISIS, the idea and the mindset and the vibe and the flavor of the game world, these are things that matter. And if you're going to be a commander or a commander of a merc unit or a commander in general, you still maintain that stuff, and you're at least in theory, in off the table parts of the game. The paperwork still gets done, whether you actually sit down and do all your paperwork or not. The idea is there. So the house units have battalions of technicians and specialists and things like this, but even they're handicapped to a certain degree. If you're part of the, your 4th Avant Guards gets stuck out on the periphery somewhere and they're there for an unspecified amount of time, and it takes 6 months for the supply chain to bring things to you, and your battle master loses a leg actuator where now your battle master can't move around at all. It's just been sidelined, and it's going to take you 6 months to get a replacement for it. Or then out in the field, your guys come across a charger and beat it senseless, and your techs drag what's left of it back to the field, and they discover that the leg actuator that's in the charger is suitable enough to fit your Battlemaster 2. They shoehorn it in, they kit bash it together. Next thing your Battlemaster's up and running. So the damage done to these machines are important because potentially in a campaign you get the game of attrition that plays its role too. So I start out with 12 mechs, and in 3 weeks of combat I might be down to 3, and half of my mechs might have got destroyed or completely devastated to the point that they will take months to be repaired and put back into function, or there'd be some weird side effect of battle where one critical component failed, and or maybe one of those 300-year-old components has finally give up the ghost and fails. Then my leg actuator, my Battlemaster can't move. Now I got this 85-ton War Knight sitting around in the cradles or in storage and my pilot's sitting idle, jousting, grousing, and bitching, and the sheer significant material source of armor and firepower that machine added to my particular company is no longer available. You have to rethink your tactics and rethink how you're going to operate that next campaign or that next encounter in that campaign. This is also the beginning of the ground understanding of why we raid so much, why we would go after another side's resources, and we're doing it so we can keep our side functioning. Once again, the Battle of Tikiad, one of the crucial failures of the clans was to understand logistics. They got so comfortable with their short round and challenge combat, where we bid down to the least amount of resources and waste of material, etc., and the other side honors the win. But when the other side is fighting its life and isn't willing to do that, then what? You're in a grind fest no matter how you've spent it, or how great your technology is. And if it takes a year for your supply chain to catch up to you, every time you lose a machine, you better have some good scavenging techs. You better have some good scavengers. Every time you destroy a machine beyond salvage, you're now lacking a machine. Suddenly those fancy, expensive Omnimex are much, much, much less practical in a long campaign than what their designers ever expected, because that's the truth. So the same thing happens with munitions. At the Battle of Tikiad, entire clans were stymied almost from the get-go because they lost their stockpile, or they didn't bring enough munitions. They didn't bring enough consumables. So they fired their wad on the first go, and then suddenly found themselves using their secondary weapons and with a handful of limited energy-based stuff that they had. And when the attrition started to take its toll on it, they were done. So that's that. So the idea of why salvage is important, why we salvage in the game, and why it's such an added flavor or piece of the iconic Battletech universe is what sets it apart from other game systems. Just one of many, many things. At least that's my opinion. This is Rick, and you're seated at the table, and I hope we'll talk to you again soon. You guys have a great weekend.